welcome to the World Cup Day 7 roundup. And today we had 4 games, which was Argentina against Mexico, France, Denmark, Poland against the Saudi Arabia. I always think when I say KS, because KSA is the abbreviation for that, I always think South Africa for some reason, even though it's obviously Saudi Arabia, and Australia against Tunisia. Today it was interesting football. I was only really able to watch, I think, was it 2.5 games, if that, probably today, just because I've been particularly busy today, doing all sorts of different things. But some pretty good football overall. I tend to find that when France are playing on a day, it's just a lot more interesting. Like that French team, they just go for it, and it's a lot more fun to watch than some of the other teams that I've seen in this tournament. Maybe their gun-ho attitude might cost them further down the line, but for now, they look really good. But yeah, we're going to go through down the winners and losers of today and see what happens tomorrow as well. And that massive Spain-Germany game. But to start with then, I think what I'm going to do quickly is just go over a couple of the, let's just say, less entertaining games, and then go from there. So the headline from Australia-Tunisia was that it was 1-0. Really good goal, actually. I forget the name of the guy who scored, but it was just a brilliant diving header. Fantastic. And this actually is something that keeps cropping up in this World Cup, but it will crop up at a lot of World Cups, is that players who just aren't that well known popping up and scoring brilliant goals, and goals that you never really saw coming. I think the reason why a lot of these players might do it now, but they might not necessarily do it in a top level at a club, is probably because the consistency isn't there. So you might see, if you watch Championship football, for example, you'll see sometimes some brilliant goals. But the reason why a lot of those players aren't in the Premier League is because they can't do it on a regular basis. And if you're playing in the Premier League, you have to do it every single week. The players like Mo Salah, Kevin De Bruyne, Erling Haaland come to mind. Even Sadio Mane when he was there as well. And you can't really afford not to be on your game in the Premier League. This Australia team are better than the 4-1 result against France suggested. But I do think that result also suggests there's a big gap between the top tier teams and the rest of the World Cup teams to this year. Tunisia just didn't really offer enough, and that tends to be a bit of a theme as well for this World Cup in terms of teams who have not really committed in their attacking. If a team hasn't attacked, they haven't scored. Which sounds like a really obvious thing and stupid thing to say, but it's basically the teams who haven't committed players forward, kind of gone with a high press or gone really aggressive. If they're the weaker team, then they're probably losing the game. And that tends to happen quite a lot. We saw the same thing with Iran. We saw the same thing with Qatar. We saw the same thing even with who's the other team? Who was it Senegal played yesterday? I can't remember now. But yeah, they played. Senegal played Qatar. Ecuador, that's right. Ecuador are probably the only team, actually, I think, that have actually done it successfully, where they've kind of sat back and had relative success with that, albeit they have still got a big game coming up against Senegal, and they may end up losing that game because of that approach. But again, Tunisia just didn't look threatening at all. Maybe limited by the players they've got, which is fair, but I do think Australia deserved their win. Poland, Saudi Arabia was interesting because I think that for a long time, especially if you listen to the commentary, for a long time you'd have thought that Saudi Arabia were the favourites, not favourites, but they were doing the better football. They were playing the better football, and they deserved to be going in front at half time. They didn't. It was still 0-0. And I think really the reason why Poland deserved to win this game was just because they were more ruthless with their finishing. That's what I've written down. It's a fair scoreline given their ruthless finishing, and Saudi Arabia weren't ruthless, which is kind of the opposite to what they were like against Argentina, where Saudi Arabia had basically 2 chances and they scored both of them. And take those 2 chances away, I think Argentina win that 1-0. So the big moment, though, in this game, I think, was the penalty that was saved. I don't think it was a penalty. It was a clumsy attempt to win the ball. by the Polish defender. It's actually Christian Bielik as well, which is a real shame because he's an ex-Arsenal player, and I think he got really close to scoring at one point. I was like, yes, go on, score. Yeah, he's an all right player. He came through the youth system at Arsenal, and he never really got into the first team, and ended up going out on loan several times, and then eventually sold. But yeah, he's done pretty well in this Poland team. I think he's done very well to get into the Polish team. But that decision was soft. I think there's not a lot of contact, and the player exaggerates it. The player going down exaggerates it massively. The penalty is given, but then Szczesny pulls out, I wouldn't say an amazing save, because I don't think it was a great penalty. What I would say was the shot that happened afterwards, that was a brilliant save by Szczesny, because he has to reach his hand up all the way to reach that ball. And if he doesn't reach it, Saudi Arabia score. And that would be 1-1. It would have completely changed the game, I think, because Poland at that point had an amount of confidence. But after the penalty miss, it looked like they just grew in confidence through the game. And then getting the second goal just kind of felt inevitable at that point, that Saudi Arabia would end up crumbling at that point, and that's pretty much what happened. It could have been 3 or 4. But it's a good game, well played, Poland. I do think they probably are now showing a bit more after that first game against Tunisia, where they looked... No, was it Tunisia? No, it wasn't Tunisia. Denmark. The first game against Denmark? No, it wasn't. Mexico. I'm getting my groups mixed up because there's all sorts of... The way they've ordered the games today, it's like one group and then a different group and then back to the original group and then a different group again. It's very strange. So Poland have shown their true colours in this game, where they couldn't really break down Mexico last time out. And as we'll see later, there's a good reason why they weren't able to break down Mexico, but we'll talk about that later. As to who's favourites in this group, actually, we'll talk about that in a minute after we talked about the next 2 games. So next up, France-Denmark. It's just great watching France. I just love watching this team. They're brilliant. Dembele on the right was fantastic in this game. Really disappointed to see him come off after about an hour, because it looked like he was getting the better of his fullback all the way through the game. And he was probably one good dribble away from getting him sent off and then being able to really open up the game for France. But it just didn't happen. They got their sent. They brought him off, brought on Coman, and I don't think France looked that threatening on that side at that point. I think Coman's a weird player. I've never really thought of him as a player. Yes, he scored the winning goal in the Champions League final, but I've never thought of him as a player who you start from the beginning of a game, or even changes games in the middle of a game by bringing him on. I think he's quite fast. He's okay technically. He's not a great finisher, and I don't think he provides a great ball in the box. Like what is his point? It reminds me a bit of Rashford, but without the finishing. It's weird player. But the two, I'll talk about the goals then. So, firstly, Mbappe's goal. I think he constantly found himself on so much space on the left-hand side. And this was a failing on Denmark's part, and defensively. While they had the ball, Denmark were not paying attention to what was happening at the back. And they should have known after the first half especially, Mbappe would pull out to the left. And then when France got the ball, they would very quickly switch it from right to left and give it to Mbappe, get him on a one-on-one against the fullback. And it happened time and time again. And it's amazing, actually, Mbappe didn't score more goals in this game, because he could easily have done. And it was just a simple 1-2 with Hernandez, who was just overlapping. And then he cuts the ball back to Mbappe, who scores. Pretty easy goal, in all likelihood. And I just can't understand. So I'm trying not to take too much away from Mbappe here, because he's an amazing player and he's so good to watch. It reminds me so much of Henry in his pomp. It was just a fantastic player. The only problem I have with it is if you decide to go all out attack against this French team, you've got to make sure that left side's covered, because I would almost rather that left side is more covered than the right-hand side, personally. Albeit Dembele actually was exploiting the right-hand side quite a lot as well. So, But then the equaliser came out of nowhere. I wasn't expecting this. Denmark hadn't really provided that much of a threat in this game. They were kind of relatively threatening, but it definitely looked like at times, especially in the second half, France looked like they were going to overwhelm this Denmark defence. They didn't, because Denmark scored with Christensen from a corner. But Rabiot again, I don't really know. It's very difficult to criticise France, I think, at the moment, because they are winning games, and it's difficult to really kind of pull them apart that much. But Rabiot is one player I do not understand why he plays for this team. There's got to be better options in the squad. In fact, I'm gonna look for this because I feel this strongly about it. I remember Rabiot was he was linked with Man United, I think, and a lot of Man United fans hated this idea. They did not want him. And as soon as they heard they were getting Casemiro, they were kind of overjoyed. They were like, wow, this is amazing. So what an upgrade. How do we manage to go from Rabiot to Casemiro with the same scouting? And I was very confused by this as well. The alternatives were, you know what, actually, there isn't. Okay, Camavinga. Guendouzi. Okay, right. I can kind of see. So Camavinga is one. I think Camavinga should probably be starting ahead of Rabiot. The only question, I think, when you're talking about Camavinga is his experience. He is very young. I think he's about 20, 21. I might be wrong there, but he's around that age. I think Rabiot's like mid to late 20s. So why? That's the only justification I can see. The rest of it, I honestly just don't think he provides enough. He had a couple of flash points in terms of chances, a good header, I think, and an overhead kick, which was never going to go in. It was close, but it wasn't going to go in. It's the big failing, I think, for him is the defensive failing. And this will be where they are tested, this French team, later down the line, because France are great going forward. We know all about that. But when they play against a team, probably like Brazil, they're the only team really right now that come to mind that will test them on an attacking front. Test their defensive ability that much. And it's funny that the Argentina result happened like it did today, because if Argentina finished second in their group, they could end up playing France in the last 16, which would be really interesting. Obviously, a replay of the last time in the World Cup 2018, where they played each other. I think it was also in the last 16, and France ended up winning that game. So, yeah, it was a good equaliser from Denmark, and definitely took advantage of that defensive weakness of Rabiot. And then France hit back. Unfortunately, I had to leave the house at this point. I literally left the house, and I heard this on the commentary. I was kicking myself. Could have gone out 10 minutes later and seen the goal. But it was a very strange goal, though. I saw it in the highlights afterwards. And I think it's a corner. Well, no, it's not. It's a corner that gets recycled, and the ball gets put back in from the wide area. And somehow Mbappe managed to sneak around the back, and no one sees him. It's like they've completely forgotten that he's there, when he's been kind of sat out on that left-hand side all game. I don't even know who was playing right back in this game for. Well, there's the answer, because they were playing three at the back. That might be partly why that was the problem. But Anderson was playing right centre back, and then we also had Christensen, who was playing at right wing back or right midfield. That probably explains a bit why they were struggling with that, maybe. But it was just, I couldn't believe that defending when I saw it. I was like, how can they make that kind of mistake? And it's absolutely cost Denmark in this game, because I think without that, they'll be coming away with a point from this game, and that would have completely changed this this group for them, really. No, that's not true. I think they needed to win the game to make a massive difference in this group. They had to win this game. Obviously, going 2-1 down kind of ruled that out. So the last game then. Excuse me. So the last game then was Argentina against Mexico, which I was out this evening, so I wasn't able to watch it. So I'll just give you a brief summary of what happened. Mexico was just stout in their defending. First half, completely nullified Argentina. It sounded like, based on the highlights that we watched, that I watched on the BBC Sport website, just looked abysmal. And Argentina looked terrible. In that there wasn't a highlight from most of the first half. There's like one little snippet, and then they moved straight to the second half. And that says everything to me. When a program does that, or they don't show you anything really for the first half, it shows you that the defensive team has really done a good job on them. Second half, though, Messi gets the ball, smacks in the bottom corner, 1-0, and then second goal. Yes, it's a good strike, but got to say the goalkeeper's at fault. I think he should be saving that. I don't rate Ochoa as a goalkeeper. I think he's average. His big hair makes him look like a celebrity, but it's average. And the defense not closing him down is also a big deal. You need to be closing someone down if they're going in on goal like that, right-footed. Fernandez, that was his name. And if he's right-footed, you've got to close him down. You can't let him shoot on his right foot. It's just ridiculous defending. And for a team who kind of pride themselves on the good defending, and they did so well to shut down Denmark, they've now set themselves up, and they've got to play they've got to play a game against Saudi Arabia, which is not going to be easy, and they may both end up going out despite the positive results they might have got before. Argentina are a really weird one right now, because obviously they lost to Saudi Arabia. They've just beaten Mexico. They could end up winning the group at this point. Like a win against Poland more than likely wins them the group. I think it would come down to goal difference, so it would depend on how much. So if Saudi Arabia could absolutely thrash Mexico, then there's a chance that Saudi Arabia could win the group, even if Argentina win. But if not, then Argentina probably will win the group if they beat Poland. Having said that, this Poland team aren't bad, and I do think they've got the attacking threat that could stop Argentina from absolutely walloping them. And it definitely is in the balance. Like, it's all coming down to this game. Argentina, I think, getting into the last 16 is going to be difficult for them, very much so. But I think they should do it. The problem I have with this Argentina team is it took Messi to break the deadlock again. It took him to break the deadlock in the last game against Saudi Arabia, which they eventually lost. And then it took him to score the first goal in this game against Mexico. If he doesn't perform, what happens to this Argentina team? Because they do not have enough talent elsewhere in this team to be able to win games. And I think that all this talk of them winning the World Cup before the start of the tournament, it should really be thrown down the bin where it deserves to be, because it's just, they're not good enough to do that. I saw today that they played Martinez at the back, which is a change from their last game. Romero. So I don't know if Romero was injured. But I do think that him being replaced by Martinez improved Argentina defensively in the last game. And it seemed to have done the same thing today, although I don't really think they had a lot to do, to be fair. So that's actually odd, though, because I don't know what the time of the goals were. Oh, no. Yeah, it did improve them defensively, because Saudi Arabia conceded the 2 goals and then Martinez came on. Saudi Arabia scored the 2 goals and then Martinez came on. So I don't know what to think of this Argentina team, but they shouldn't be considered as favourites to win the World Cup. Obviously, we're really early days. Wait till if they're in the semi-finals, then obviously anything can happen. But I just think it's really difficult to make a case given the teams that are around them. So yeah, we'll have to wait and see. They're paired in the same group as France. They could, in the same set of groups as France for the last 16, so they could end up playing them. If they do, I think that's curtains. I think there's no way. If they can avoid France, there may be a chance. Haha, bit of rhyming there. If they can avoid France, there may be a chance of getting further into this tournament. And we're going to talk a bit about that now because we've got a bit of an idea about who we should expect to finish first and second in each group. So at the moment, in Group C, Poland are top with 4 points, then it's Argentina with 3, Saudi Arabia with 3, and Mexico with 1. Now, obviously, Poland just need a point against Argentina to qualify. Obviously, this is Argentina we're talking about. They could pull a rabbit out of the hat and start winning games easily. Not in that way, but against a team like Poland, Argentina could probably win this not playing particularly well. The problem is, if Poland can keep them out, then Argentina are hoping for a favour from Mexico. Because technically, I suppose it depends, because if Poland beat Argentina, then it really depends on how much they beat them by. Because if Saudi Arabia, or if they beat them and then Saudi Arabia get a point, then Argentina are out. I think it's fair to say if Argentina lose, they are out. I'm just looking at the table now because Saudi Arabia or Mexico would end up on 4 points, regardless of how the results go out. And if Argentina lose, they'd be stuck on 3 below them. So they would go out. And that would be a shock. But I don't think that'll happen. I think that Argentina will probably end up winning the game, which will guarantee them qualification. And then it's about whether they finish top or not. And I would expect Saudi Arabia not to beat Mexico, which means they definitely won't finish top. And then Poland will be hoping that either it's a Saudi Arabian draw or a Mexico win. A Saudi Arabian win would put Poland out unless Poland win. A lot of stuff. But watch out Wednesday evening next week for those games because they are going to be explosive, I think. Finally, we're going to get to a point where all teams are going to have to go for it. There is no situation, no scenario here where a team is happy to sit back. I think on 0-0 is my point. I don't think anyone would be happy to sit back on a 0-0. It'd be too risky. I suppose if there's one team who could do that, it's Poland, because if they get a point, they're guaranteed to go through. But everyone else needs to go for the win. As far as France are concerned, we know they're through. They're on 6 points. Australia 3, Denmark 1, Tunisia 1. Given that the head-to-head record between France and Australia is obviously in France's favour because they won against them, I'm expecting them to finish top of the group. But also, given that France are playing Tunisia, that's probably going to be an easy France win, given how well they've played. And I think they've already played the two most difficult teams in this group. It's now down to whether Denmark can beat Australia. And that's a battle for second place. If Argentina win their group, then they're probably playing one of those two teams. I'd be very surprised if Tunisia pull a rabbit out of the hat and beat France. Because that's what they need to do, basically, at this point. So we're looking at France first, and then Australia or Denmark second from that group. And then from the other group, we're looking at, well, it's really difficult. Because you've got, basically it's 4-3-3-1 is the distribution of points in that group. So is it really that easy to pick a winner from these groups? It isn't. I'm going to go with an Argentina win. I still think they'll win the group, which does mean they'll be playing Australia or Denmark. And I would expect Denmark to win that game, I think. They do have enough quality to do that. And then Argentina and then Poland to finish second. Poland to finish second. Only because I think that Mexico could probably beat Saudi Arabia. I don't know if Saudi Arabia can necessarily win that game against Mexico. If they do, of course, they make the last 16 for the first time almost ever. I think they might have done it once before. I'll have to check you on that one. But obviously, they won their first game since 1994. I believe, actually, they did make the last 16 in 1994. There you go. So that was the last time they won a game. It's also the last time they qualified. So it'll be the first time in that same amount of time that they've managed to make the last 16. Can they go any further than that? Well, the thing is, they'll be finishing second and they'll be playing France. I'd love a France-Saudi Arabia game, actually, because that would probably be... It can't get more David and Goliath than that, I think, in this World Cup. Everyone will be backing Saudi Arabia. It would be a really tough game for France, because I just don't think they can come out as the winners in any scenario. Even if they win 5-0 and thrash them, I don't think they would come out as the winners, because everyone will be expecting that. And if they push them to extra time or penalties, Saudi Arabia will be seen as the winners. It's very, very difficult game for France, that. So what are we expecting from Saudi Arabia? Just a good game. I think they'll probably go all out, try and win that game. If they get a point, I think they're risking not going through by getting a point, because their goal difference isn't really good enough. Losing 2-0 today kind of put that to the sword a bit. So they really need to get a point. No, they need to get a win, because I can't see a scenario where they get a point and they're going to go through. I really can't see that. So before we finish today, I just want to talk a bit about the last few games that are happening tomorrow. We've got 4 more games. So we've got Japan, Costa Rica, and Spain, Germany from Group E. So Japan, Costa Rica is the first game tomorrow at 10 o'clock, and then the last game at 7 o'clock in the evening is the big Spain, Germany game, which is absolutely huge. I think it's probably the biggest game in the World Cup so far. It's almost a knockout game for Germany, really, because if they lose, they're out. And if they draw, they're not out. But that really depends on how Japan do against Costa Rica, because with Japan beating Germany, that means that if Japan beat Costa Rica as well, they go through. And given how poor Costa Rica were in that first game against Spain, I'm fully expecting this Japan team to beat them. If they do that, Japan go into the game against Spain knowing that they could potentially go through even, well, if they do that, they're through, actually. Forget what I'm talking about there. So if they win, and then say Spain and Germany draw, they could go into the game against Spain knowing that they're through and they're simply fighting for top spots. And if they are thinking that, Germany are having to not just beat Costa Rica, but hoping that Japan draw against Spain. I think that's how that works. Yeah. No. They'd have to beat Spain. They'd be they'd be hoping they need because the scenario would be Japan would be top with 6 points. Then you'd have Spain on 4 points, then Germany on 1 point, and then Costa Rica on none. So essentially, for Germany to qualify, they would have to hope for a Spain defeat against Japan and to beat Costa Rica themselves. That's a really tall order. I would expect Spain to beat Japan, definitely. So my point here is that Germany have to win, unless obviously we'll know earlier in the day the Japan-Costa Rica game will happen. If Japan win that game, it is on for this Germany team, because they really need a point at the least to mathematically stay in it. But to actually realistically stay in it, they probably have to win. Obviously, if that game between Japan and Costa Rica doesn't go that way and it ends up being a point, then it kind of lets them off the leash a little bit. Because I think Germany, if they've only got to catch up by 3 points in the last day against Japan, that's much more realistic. If they can't even catch Japan by the end, that's a lot more difficult, because the team they'll be trying to catch is Spain. So it's just a huge... I mean, that Japan-Germany result has just thrown that group wide open. And that's what can happen in a group of death a little bit. I wouldn't necessarily say this is a proper group of death, but the fact that you have 2 big hitters at the top of this group in Spain and Germany, and then Germany basically have to play the 2 more difficult teams first, it does set up this kind of scenario. England faced this exact scenario in 2014. Yes, 2014, where we played Italy and Uruguay first, and then we played Costa Rica. Funny how Costa Rica are in this group as well. That's interesting. So we played Italy, we lost, and then we went into the game against Uruguay knowing we had to win. Well, we had to not lose, but I think realistically we had to win, and we lost to a Luis Suarez goal. It's just, you couldn't write it. And I said to people before, way back when the draw was made, that England could be out of that group. They could be out of the tournament after 2 games, and they were. At the time, I think everyone was, no, they won't, no, they'll go through. Calling me a negative old sod, but in the end, actually, that was the case, and I wouldn't be surprised if we're talking about the same thing with Germany here. I think these Japan and Spain games could end up defining this World Cup for them, which will be really disappointing for Germany, given that they are, I believe they're hosting the next Euros, and for them it's really in terms of their vision going forward, it's completely on that Euros at the moment, even during this World Cup. I think a lot of that is down to the political kind of the political restlessness, I think is the best way of putting it, for Germany around this World Cup, and a lot of the things they would like to be able to say but they can't, and that whole hand over the mouth thing before the Japan game probably took their eye off the ball a bit. And yeah, I think it'll be really interesting to see what Germany we see turning up in that game. In terms of the other 2 games that are on tomorrow, it's in the Belgium-Croatia group with Morocco and Canada. So we're seeing Belgium play Morocco and Croatia play Canada. Now, obviously, the most interesting thing to happen here would be one of those 2 dropping points again and making the last game between Croatia and Belgium have something on it. At the moment, I don't think there's much on it, because Croatia probably need to beat Canada, and I think they probably will, but that Canada team's really impressive. I remember watching them play Belgium, and I think they were really unlucky not to win that game. Really unlucky. So I'm expecting them to turn up and do really well against this Croatia team. Belgium, Morocco, I wasn't very impressed by Morocco when they played Croatia, but that was probably because they were just playing a backs to the wall job. And they'll probably do the same thing here. And I'm expecting them to do quite well, because Belgium looked pretty toothless going forward in their last game. So I'm expecting a draw from Belgium, Morocco, and a Canada win against Croatia. Can't believe I'm saying this. That Croatia team's quite good, but it's quite old. And the Canada team's kind of the opposite of that, really. It's young, but I wouldn't necessarily say it's technically amazing. But they are a good team, Canada. So I'm going to go with that. And the group would look like, if this is how it finished, Belgium would be top with 4 points. And then, depending on how much... Oh, no, there would be, actually. Because then it would be Canada on 3. Then it would be Morocco on 2 and Croatia on 1 point. Really putting the cat amongst the pigeons for the last game between Belgium and Croatia. And then Canada would set themselves up to potentially qualify against Morocco. Of course, if Belgium win against Morocco, they are through. And I think it's likely that they would be group winners unless Croatia beat Canada. Pretty much. I think they'd pretty much be nailed on as group winners unless Croatia beat Canada. Yeah, so that's all of tomorrow's games, and obviously I'll be coming tomorrow with another video just talking about those games. So if you have any ideas, suggestions for these videos, or if you have any points you want to make in the chat below, please make them. I want to hear what you guys think of these games. Who do you think is going to win the World Cup? Who's going to win in that Belgium and Croatia group? Who's going to finish top in the Spain, Japan, Germany group? And who do you think Germany is still going to be in this tournament by the end of tomorrow night? But that's all from me. Thank you very much for watching. If you enjoyed what you're watching, please hit the like button. And if you want to see more, don't forget to subscribe and use the bell icon to be reminded next time I put up a video. But for now, thank you very much for watching, and I'll see you tomorrow.